I think the greatest thing that any Christian can desire is to have a greater faith in God, because faith is what is pleasing to God, and as we increase in faith, everything changes in our life, including the way we live. But sadly, this is the thing that many Christians struggle with, and they don't see their faith growing in the way that they want it to. So in this video, I'm going to share some important and powerful truths about faith. I'm going to tell you what faith is biblically and the things that you can do so that God can grow your faith. So first of all, what is faith? A lot of Christians get confused about this. They think that faith is a feeling, and what they end up doing is actually putting faith in their faith or their feelings of faith rather than putting their faith in God. But faith biblically is actually very simple. It's simply believing that what God says is true, regardless of anything else. So I'll give you an illustration. Imagine that you looked at the calendar. You wanted to see what the date was, and then you go outside and the weather is either a lot warmer or a lot colder than it usually is that time of the year. You're not going to doubt that what the calendar is saying is true, regardless of what the weather is saying. And this is the same with our faith. In this analogy, the calendar is like the Bible in the sense that we know that it's a fact. We know that it's unchanging. And the weather is like our thoughts, feelings, and circumstances, which we know are not always the best indicator of what truth is. And what God actually calls us to do is to trust Him, to trust that what He says is true, regardless of what we may not feel or what we may not see. It says in Hebrews 11:1 that faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. So now that we know what faith is, let's have a look at what we can do so that God will increase our faith. I have 3 points here. So the first point is that it's not about the quantity of faith, but rather it's about the presence of genuine faith. So the apostles came to Jesus in Luke 17:5-6, and they asked him to increase their faith. And Jesus responded by saying that if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can say to this mulberry tree, be uprooted and planted into the sea, and it will obey you. And what this is it's a metaphor for God doing the supernatural, God doing incredible things in response to even the smallest amount of genuine faith. There's another story in Mark 9:23 where Jesus says that all things are possible for the one who believes. And then in the next verse, the man says, I believe, help my unbelief. So he's admitting that he doesn't have perfect faith, but he's bringing the faith that he does have before Jesus. And what happens? Jesus responds to the presence of genuine faith, even though the faith isn't perfect faith, and he does a miracle. And this should be a great encouragement to you. It's definitely a huge encouragement to me. So the second point is that we shouldn't focus on our feelings. We shouldn't try to work up what we feel is a faith or a feeling of faith. Don't worry about that at all. All that we need to do is to get a greater revelation of who God is. We get into His Word and we look through it and we ask God in prayer to reveal Himself more, have a greater revelation of who He is and our identity in Him. And as this takes place, what happens is He responds to our faith as we come before Him. He gives us a greater revelation. We see things clearer through new eyes. And as we see Him clearer, it changes everything. And our faith increases automatically. I love the verse in 2 Corinthians 3:18. Now and we with unveiled face, beholding the glory of God, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. As we see God clearer, transformation takes place in our life. We don't even need to focus on the faith that we're not feeling or anything like that, but just focus on Him and He will increase our faith. The third point, which is very important, is that faith grows over time. Let me give you an illustration. So right now I'm next to an elm tree, which is a really big tree, and it hangs over the top of me. It's so big that you can actually see it from the main road over the top of the houses. This tree was actually planted over 30 years ago by my nonno, which is Italian for grandpa. And when it was planted, it was about up to the height of my chest. Now, 30 minutes after it was planted, people weren't looking at it, stressing, saying, why isn't it as big as it is right now? Because we all know that it takes time for a tree to grow. In fact, people could look at the tree a day later or weeks later and see no difference. But this doesn't mean that it's not growing. When we look back, we can see that it was actually growing all along. And this is the same with our faith. And this is what we need to know, is that it takes time for our faith to grow. We need to be consistent. We need to be intentional. We need to continue to come before God patiently, even when we feel like nothing is happening, when we feel like our faith isn't increasing, and believe that He is increasing our faith in response to even the smallest amount of genuine faith that we bring before Him. So many people, they just think that God's going to zap them, they're going to have an experience, their faith is just going to be enormous. They go to conferences, they get these emotional experiences, they think they have this great faith, and they come away and they're the same because all they had was an emotional experience. They weren't transformed. We can't fall into that trap. So in summary, faith is simply believing that what God says is true, regardless of anything else. Don't focus on your feelings. Don't worry about your feelings of faith or your lack of feelings of faith. Simply come before God even when you're not feeling it, which is great faith. Bring the little faith that you do have before Him. Ask Him to give you a greater revelation of who He is. And as He does this, your faith will increase. And do this consistently and diligently, intentionally and patiently, and trust that all the while, even when you don't see things happening, that God is working. I hope that this video spoke to you and blessed you. I'd love to get your thoughts. Please leave your comments below, and I look forward to talking to you soon. God bless you.